Saturday, USC versus Penn State. It's USC's first playoff game of the year.
You are Locked On Trojans, your daily podcast on the USC Trojans. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Fight on, everyone. I'm your host, Mark Culkin, and thanks for making this crossover episode of Locked On USC and Locked On Nittany Lions with their host, Zach Seyko. This is going to be your first listen every day, whether you're watching the show on YouTube, wherever you're going to download your podcast. This show is always going to be free, and I'm always going to appreciate your support. Zach, what about you? Do you appreciate everyone's support?
Yeah, I absolutely do. And most importantly, I always emphasize this on my solo shows. Let me know your thoughts let us know your thoughts down in the comments section. Likes are great, shares are great, but honestly, I like the open discussion with the viewers, the listeners, talking about Penn State and USC football in this case. So if you got a score prediction, let us know in the comments.
Absolutely. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you're going to get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com, and you can get started today. All right, Zach, it's USC versus Penn State. Last time these two teams played, Rose Bowl. One of us left a little bit happier than the other, I'm sure. We are SC versus we are Penn State. And I have to set the record straight here. USC did originate the chant. A Penn State cheerleader even confirmed that back in the 70s. That's how that all came about, just to let everybody know. It's going to be a sold-out LA Coliseum. Energy is going to be electric. Last week, USC was ranked number 11 in the country. This week, they're not. Penn State's number 4 team in the country. And you guys are hitting the road. You're keeping up. For USC, this is their first playoff game. If they lose again, they have no chance. So I guess, is this a trap game or a business trip win for Penn State? What are your thoughts on this game?
So I just talked to Spencer McLaughlin of Locked On College Football and Locked On Ducks not too long ago to have kind of a similar conversation. He wanted to know, hey, what's the Penn State side of things look like? And I fully agree that yes, I like the way that you characterized it. It's a playoff game because it is absolutely a must win. The Trojans, their backs are against the wall for USC, Lincoln Riley. If you don't win this game, I can't see a 9-3 USC team getting into the playoff if that ends up being a loss. And the schedule doesn't get any easier for USC either. So it's not a guarantee that, you'll just go on a winning streak and everything's going to be okay. And for Penn State, so Spencer, and I disagree with what Spencer had to say. He says, well, Penn State can afford to lose this game. They can afford to lose to Ohio State and be 10-2, and they'll still be securely in the playoff. Do we know that for a fact? Do we just assume now that with USC being unranked, okay, would technically be an unranked upset victory for the Trojans when if the ball bounces a couple different ways against Michigan and Minnesota, these are two top 10, 5-0 teams going at each other, and now it's a completely different story here. But Penn State doesn't want to leave its destiny in the hands of the College Football Playoff Committee. They are not too keen on, well, if you go 10-2, then maybe you get that number 9 or 10 seed, then you're playing a road game in the first round. Penn State's number 4 right now. It probably sounds pretty good to James Franklin and company to win as many games as possible and potentially have that playoff bye, because if they were the 4 seed, if everything stopped today, that's what would happen. They would have a bye into the next round.
Yeah, if the playoffs started tomorrow, Penn State's got a home field advantage and they got the bye. You're absolutely correct. Now, I'm just wondering, what is the perception of this USC team? As I mentioned, they were the 11th ranked team going into that Minnesota game. Apparently, the big conference admitted they didn't even follow their own replay rules, and here we are today. USC is unranked. They took that precipitous fall from number 11 to who are you? What kind of, how do you see this USC team? Are they better than 3-2? Have they been getting some calls going against them? What is their biggest bugaboo as far as the outside looking in?
Mark, it's interesting, and you've probably seen the general consensus too, is that USC isn't as good as advertised. You should sell out on this USC team. They're not, Lincoln Riley's on the hot seat. That kind of discourse. And from Penn State's side of things, I mean, there's at least respect among, fellow Penn State media members, just Penn State fans in general. Sure, you're going to get some people that say this should be an easy win for Penn State. Forget about the road trip. This is Penn State wins every single head-to-head matchup when you look at the X's and O's. And I'm confident that Penn State's going to put up a very strong fight here, but it's not because USC is going to roll over. Again, if the ball bounces a different way for USC in both of those, that's a 3-point game against Michigan on the road. That's a 7-point game, pardon me, that went down to the wire, and there was a not fumble forced at the goal line. If USC comes away with that against Minnesota, it's a completely different conversation. So I do not look at this USC team as a 3-2 team. Now, I think it's justified them being 3-2 and being out of the AP top 25, because the only other 2-loss team that is in the AP top 25 is Michigan, and USC lost to Michigan. So therefore, logically, that makes sense. I agree with the decision for them not to be ranked, but I don't look at them. I don't look at USC as an unranked team.
Okay. Let me ask you this. Because I think for USC fans, it's kind of ironic that it's the offense that's kind of holding them back this year. Mm-hmm. I know USC isn't great defensively, but they are significantly better than what they've been for these last few years. And save for a couple of, well, I shouldn't say, save for a few explosive run plays that have happened against them, going back to that Michigan game. Why hasn't USC's offense been able to get on track? I mean, the obvious answer, offensive line. But why? Because they're running the ball well. It's the passing game that's been having some issues.
And that's interesting to me, Mark, because I look at Deuce Robinson as a matchup nightmare. I look at Zachariah Branch as somebody that can hit the home run at any point in time, just get the football into his hands and let him work. I think of jet sweeps, screen plays, gadget plays, just to find a way to get him the football. But because of the offensive line in the passing game, and Miller Moss, this was pointed out to me, even though it's not really, it's obvious. There's a big difference between Miller Moss and Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams could do so much acrobatics, things you couldn't script, things that you couldn't put in the game plan yourself if you were USC. He would just be able to go out and create some magic. Miller Moss doesn't have that ability. I think he's smart. I think he studies the game as well as anybody. He prepares as well as anybody. He's got an arm, but he doesn't have maybe that it factor. And definitely it's far away from what Caleb Williams had. So the offensive line, you can afford a bad offense, because that's USC's offensive line wasn't good a season ago, as I remember, but Caleb Williams extended plays, extended drives by himself. He didn't need a scheme. He didn't need fellow players to help him out. He'd just do it himself, and now USC is really missing that.
Yeah, well, actually what they're really missing is their wide receiver group, which was supposed to be the strength of their offense going into the season. You mentioned Deuce Robinson. You mentioned Zachariah Branch. There's Jacoby Lane. There's another sophomore. His name is Makai Lemon. It's been the drops. So when Miller Moss does get his time to survey the field, when he gets 3 Mississippis, back there say, all right, I can go through my progressions, he's been really good. It's lately he hasn't been getting that much time to find those guys. And when he does, you've got a Zachariah Branch who's running, wide open across the middle, hits him in the face mask. That's not on the quarterback. That's on your hands. So again, it's been a little bit of bad luck with Miller Moss, but I thoroughly agree with you. He doesn't have the athleticism that a Caleb Williams has. He does have good pocket awareness. He's got the moxie. He's got enough wheel power, I guess, to use it. But because I think he's been getting hit so much, he hasn't been using it. I think he doesn't want to expose himself out in the open field. It's kind of that should I, shouldn't I type of thing.
And I think that caught up to Caleb Williams as well last season. So he took those hits. He was, questioning his offensive line. So if Miller Moss doesn't feel that sense of security, I don't blame him.
Exactly. And the other thing with Caleb Williams last year, and again, we're going down a different rabbit hole, he tended to march to the beat of his own drummer sometimes with the play calling. We'll just leave it there. So there was a little bit of that going on. As far as what Penn State's coming to the table, bringing to the table offensively, they like to lean in the run game. We're going to talk about that in the next segment. First, we're going to do a little bit of this. So, hey, when was the last time, Zach, you went to anything that wasn't a Penn State football game, concert, comedy show, any live event? I don't know if you've used Game Time, but they have this really cool feature called Game Time Picks. It literally is going to weed out all the bad tickets and only going to show you the good stuff you want to see. And they got this really cool feature I like. It kind of zooms in. It's going to show you what you're going to see if you purchase this ticket. And that's a really cool feature. So you know exactly what you're getting before you check out. And the other thing that Game Time does, they guarantee you the best price. So if you find the ticket in the same row and section for less, check this out. They're going to credit you 110% of the difference. There's no risk. So what are you worried about? With the Game Time guarantee, you know you are getting the best price. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, Zach, I kind of segued from the first segment into this one. Penn State loves their running game. I guess my question is, they haven't really been forced yet to test their passing game based on the competition. And what I find really interesting is you got the new offensive coordinator you brought in from Kansas, Andy Nittany. What kind of impact has he had on Drew Allar so far? 40 rushing attempts per game, 21, 22 passing attempts. Why such an imbalance with the offense?
I mean, first and foremost, that's what Andy Kotelnicki's forte is. He's an offensive line guy. He's an offensive lineman himself. He's an offensive line and tight ends coach when he was just purely an assistant position coach. And then as he graduated and moved up the ranks as an offensive coordinator, he's always been partial to being, ground and pound, physical. We dictate the pace of the game. So that's not, that's not far-fetched that Andy Kotelnicki, because the same thing was at the case with Kansas. He was almost top 10, top 15 in almost every single rush category as a team with the Jayhawks. So he's going to bring what worked, over to Penn State. And when you have Nicholas Singleton, who's going to play football on Sundays, when you have Katron Allen, that's going to play football on Sundays. Sure, you have the former 5-star quarterback in Drew Aller, but it absolutely makes sense that Andy Kotelnicki wants to establish the run first, use some play action. But the question that you're asking specifically, okay, how has he helped Drew Aller? I mean, that can't even honestly be put into words. It feels like Drew Aller's not only a different quarterback, he's just a different football player. He's a different person. He kind of walks around with a sense of swagger, confidence that we didn't see a season ago. Part of that's Andy Kotelnicki being a positive influence, just being a different kind of guy, and maybe relates to Drew Aller a little better than Mike Yurcich on a personal level. And that's not to bring Mike Yurcich in the conversation, but it is important to relate. For Drew Aller, this is his second year starting in college football. He was 19 a season ago. So that confidence and maybe that quote unquote fear is going to go away just as you play more college football games and just grow up and become an adult. So part of it's Drew Aller's just maturing on his own. Part of it is he has a better support system that plays to his strengths rather than kind of forces him into a box.
Okay. I haven't done a real deep dive. I haven't, peeled back the layer, so to speak. Where's Penn State on their third down conversions? In other words, have they faced a lot of third and longs? And will your offensive coordinator and James Franklin, do they have the confidence in Drew if they are forcing those third and longs? Again, USC's defense, not great, but they do play the run pretty well. If you've seen those goal line stands they've had this year. They did it against Michigan. They did it last week against Minnesota. They did it against LSU. They have a tendency, though, to give up some explosive plays on the run. There's been like 5 of them all year. If USC can force Penn State into third and long, then where does Penn State go with their offense?
So, I mean, that's in anything, and that's third and medium, right? It just because it's 3rd and 5 doesn't mean it's easy to pick up. Sure. So Penn State has a variety of options when they get into third down. They've been actually fairly good. They've been much better compared to last season because they wouldn't sustain drives. So Penn State can go 100 miles an hour, or they can really slow it down and try to put together these 10, 12, 15 play drives. That's what I mean when I say that not only Drew Aller is not boxed in, the offense isn't boxed in. Andy Kotelnicki will run the ball 60 times if he has to. If USC is going to drop two safeties back and really vacate the box, all right, so be it. We'll run it at you with one of our two dynamic running backs. If you want to load the box, you say, hey, we respect the run. We're going to load 8 players in the box, and we're going to challenge your wide receivers, your pass catchers in single coverage. Okay, well, play action's a factor in it. You can also throw it to Singleton and Allen. You can throw it to Tyler Warren, who James Franklin, maybe a little biased, but I tend to agree with the way that he's been playing, is the most complete tight end in college football. And that's something that USC has to account for at the tight end position, not at the wide receiver position, at the tight end position. And Drew Aller, there's this misconception that he's a statue quarterback. He can run the football if he really needs to. So as long as the offensive line, when Drew has time to settle in the pocket, he doesn't get choppy feet, he doesn't feel like, hey, maybe there's a pass rusher behind me right about now. When he has the confidence and the instinct that, oh, my O-line just created me a pocket, and we're seeing that more so this season, he's able to drop back, step up, go through his progressions one by one on his timing, and then deliver a strike. And we've seen that countless times. I mean, Penn State's yards per completion is top 10 in the country. That was unheard of a season ago. A team that could not move the football at lightning speed. Penn State's offense can score in 20 seconds like it did against West Virginia, or put together that 12-play drive when they need to give the defense a break.
Who on the outside should USC fear? I mean, we know the running game is what you guys are going to lean into. We know the tight end has been part of Penn State's DNA since before I was born. But who on the outside tests USC secondary? Because USC's got a very deep secondary. They're big, they're long, they have the ability to disrupt. So who is Penn State's Zachariah Branch, Jacoby Lane, Deuce Robinson, Makai Lemon, who you say, all right, that guy can take the top off of a defense?
Sure. No, if you're looking for, player to player comparisons, I would say the equivalent to Zachariah Branch is Amari Evans. Now, everyone's going to debate, and I would probably say that Zachariah Branch is further along than Amari Evans, but Amari Evans has broken out this season. If you look at start of career compared to one another, sure, everyone's probably going to take Branch, but Amari Evans has really impressed, and I think scheme has a part of to do with it, but it unlocks a bit of confidence. It unlocks the skill set that, hey, I didn't know I had this. And that's the case, I think, for not only Drew Aller, but a player like an Amari Evans, who's put together a couple 100-yard performances on give or take 3 or 4 catches. He's that deep home run threat. He's the speedster, and they can use him in some gadget plays, some jet sweeps if they need to. If you're looking for that Jacoby Lane, that's that all-around, he's a reliable number 1 wide receiver that Drew's going to look to on the outside, that would be a Harrison Trey Wallace. He's been relatively quiet through the past few weeks, but that's because they haven't really needed him to take over a game. Tyler Warren's kind of been the most trusted pass catcher. But if we're looking specifically on the boundary, that guy is going to be Trey Wallace. Liam Clifford, younger brother of Sean Clifford, been dealing with some injuries. Now he bumps and bruises. I wouldn't say injuries necessarily, but it wasn't 100%. And now we saw him have that turning point of a game. Sure, it was against UCLA, but better late than never. And I think a good point that you just add somebody else into the passing game that, okay, if USC is going to key in on Tyler Warren and Trey Wallace, oh, you got to account for Amari Evans. Oh, you got to account for a Liam Clifford. And now Drew Aller has more weapons at his disposal, kind of like Miller Moss. I'm anticipating that USC is going to run a lot of 4, maybe 5 wide receiver sets. I don't know if they're going to do anything like, if they are going to do something like that.
Well, I don't know if that's the right type of offense to run out there. Again, Penn State's defensive line, pretty good, effective, getting pressures on the quarterback. Out here, a lot of talk of how can USC improve their pass protection. So I'm of the opinion, hey, let's keep the tight end in a little bit longer. I'm even saying, let's go tackle eligible all game long. Give me a 6th offensive lineman out there. Just to kind of, like I said, if Miller has another Mississippi and a half, that changes USC's offense. They played a tough schedule. They've been on the road. They haven't been getting the results they wanted at Michigan or at Minnesota. We'll see what happens at home against Penn State. I remember the last time Penn State came to the Coliseum when they were ranked number 4. And that wasn't a really good USC team that year. We're not sure where USC is right now. They're still learning how to win, learning how to play with a good defense. We're going to talk a little bit more about this game in the next segment. You can ask me some questions about the USC team. But first, let's do this.
All right, let's hear from another one of our sponsors on today's episode, and that is FanDuel. NFL fans, you're going to start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. You're going to get a hunch in the middle of the game. We all know that. You're going to want to check the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and you can do all of that all on the same page through FanDuel where you place your bets. So it's convenient, it's simple, and you're going to get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So you can turn $5 into $200 guaranteed when you place that first $5 bet. All you got to do is go to fanduel.com. And when it comes to Penn State versus USC, the lines are up, the lines are available. Penn State, according to FanDuel, is a 4.5-point favorite in this game. Money line is set at -200 for the Nittany Lions as the favorite. And the total, 50.5. If you like those lines, you got to go over to fanduel.com. Again, that is FanDuel, America's #1 sports book.
That's an interesting line you just dropped there, Zach. I know it opened up at 5.5. Penn State was favored, and I think the over-under was actually a little bit lower. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering what somebody knows that maybe I don't know. Maybe a little bit more high-scoring game than people are anticipating.
I think that's the case. I look at this. I mean, I'm not afraid to share my score prediction now. I said 34-27 in my solo preview. I think that the only way, because USC can't get into a defensive struggle with Penn State. Penn State has a top 10 defense. Penn State has a top 10 offense, both in terms of yards per play for offense and yards per play allowed for defense. If I'm USC, I try to speed up Penn State. I try to tire out the defense. What can I do to get this game into a shootout type of game? But Penn State can keep up. Whereas a Michigan is going to lean really heavy into that defense, only throwing for 32 passing yards. Same thing. Minnesota leaned into that running game, used a defense that I had to double check mark. They forced 12 interceptions. I thought that was a typo. I said there's no way that Minnesota has 12 interceptions on the season. Oh no, they do, and the next closest team has 6. But
actually, I think Cal has 9.
Okay.
But trust me,
then the next team after that has 6, so it's still really a big gap. But that's
huge number.
Yeah, double digits through 5, like barely halfway through the season.
Right.
So USC can't get into a defensive struggle where, hey, we're going to make a defensive stand, flip the field, and then try to make you drive down the field. And basically, it's a field position battle. There might be some elements to that. But I think if USC wants to, and I imagine they want to try to win this game, they're going to rely on, hey, we have Woody Marks. The better football players are on USC's offense, not necessarily USC's defense.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned, you kind of alluded to special teams there for a second. USC has quite possibly the best punter in the country.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if he's had enough attempts to actually qualify, but Eddie Treplisky, he can flip the field from that perspective. USC's defense, not great. You look at it on paper and saying, well, they're just kind of middle of the road statistically. But when you watch them play, you're like, all right, that's a formidable opponent. I don't want to get into a, slugfest, slow-footed type of game, which I think probably benefits Penn State more. As you mentioned, I think USC has more athletes on the offensive side of the ball. But I think the other area where hopefully it happens this week, Zachariah Branch can get a return going on a punt return or on a kickoff return. Where's your confidence level with Penn State's special teams?
It's not great. It's something that I guess I haven't discussed fully enough, because now that it actually comes into the conversation, right, there are consequences to not having at least a decent special teams unit. Caden Saunders, who's supposed to be the starting punt returner, is a wide receiver, but he was just out there to field punts because really nobody. So basically, just throw up the fair catch because you can't run. He's in a walking boot right now. It doesn't sound like he's going to play or be available. Even mum's the word on injuries when it comes to Penn State. But the understanding is that Penn State's going to have to go in a different direction here at punt returner. Zion Tracy's going to be the guy. I'm not saying that he can't field punts or return them, but that explosive playability that Zachariah Branch has, there's really nobody on Penn State that could even field a punt or just get something to roll to them and change the field like that in the kick return or the punt return game. The punter comparison, I like Riley Thompson as much as I do for Penn State's punting game. It just hasn't been the prettiest. They've been some short punts. They've gone out of bounds. There's not a lot of hang time. And I'm just wondering, okay, where's the special teams might matter and it can cost you if you're not too careful.
Right. As far as, Penn State traveling across the country, I personally, I don't think travel is a big factor, especially when you're coming from the East Coast to the West Coast. When the game kicks off, it's going to be 3:30 in the afternoon in Happy Valley.
Yes.
I don't think the players are typically getting ready for bed at that point. So, I don't think the travel across country is going to play a role. What is going to play a role in Penn State not performing up to their capabilities?
Well, I think travel is definitely important here because and hindsight's 2020, but I got a better understanding of this with UCLA. They went to Hawaii, they went to LSU, and then they got to fly back to LA in between, and then they came out to Pennsylvania and had to play what was the equivalent of a 9 a.m. Pacific time kickoff. However, they've done all of this flying, so they have, they at least know how to adjust because they've been all across the nation and they're not finished. They still have to do quite the road trip there. But for Penn State, it was a bus drive to West Virginia. This is the first serious road trip. This is only the second road game they played too. There was no neutral site. It was West Virginia. Then it was home game, bye week, home game, home game, home game. And now here we are, USC. And this isn't a couple hour plane ride. This is the 6-hour plane ride. This is the time change. This is a climate change. I can't say that it's not going to affect Penn State. But when you look at Michigan, when you look at Minnesota, teams that are really, they really rely on one element of the game to push them forward. Penn State they aren't hamstrung by one thing. So if you take away the run game or the defense, doesn't play its best performance, Penn State can get into a shootout. Penn State can get into a slugfest. Penn State can force turnovers. I do have my doubts about special teams, but special teams decides the game if it's close, not overall. Your offense and defense are obviously most important. What's going to affect them is that the moment doesn't get too big for them. I really think it's all psychological because Penn State does win a lot of the X's and O's matchups. They have the coordinators that they want. This is the midseason turning point where guys are actually adjusted to the system, and they're not all new. These are veteran players that have been around for a while, Mark. So even if it's like, okay, they're new to the systems, but they've been playing college football. They're all now veterans. So this core of the team is where it needs to be. So it's a matter of do they look at this and say, oh, it's USC, we can't lose that game. If you get jitters like that, then maybe you shouldn't even be in the college football playoff. I think that's what's going to hold them back. That psychological aspect of, oh, we go 10-2 and miss out on the playoff every year. Does that affect them this time and around? Because it seems to affect them every other time.
Speaking of the psychological aspect, this will be my last question before I give you my score prediction. Big game. James Franklin, big game wins. They typically aren't associated with each other, at least from the outside perspective. I can go back to that Rose Bowl game in 2017. Mm-hmm. I'm still trying to figure out why he's throwing the ball up like that, but hey, that's in the past. Who has the advantage here? Lincoln Riley, James Franklin?
Well, so James Franklin is he does a little bit of everything as a head coach. I likened him to the CEO. I don't know how much he's not calling plays on offense. That's Andy Kotelnicki. Tom Allen is calling the plays there. So James Franklin has input into the game plan and he's the final signature. Andy Kotelnicki will bring in, he said, so he co-signs everything, but he's not actively calling the plays, whereas Lincoln Riley, from my understanding, is calling those offensive plays. So it's Lincoln Riley versus Andy Kotelnicki. It's D'Anton versus, or I guess I should flip that. It's a Lincoln Riley versus a Tom Allen and a D'Anton versus an Andy Kotelnicki. Those are the matchups that really matter. And I respect all four of those coaches. They've been around in college football and have shown results wherever they've been. I mean, it's essentially Allen to an extent as a head coach in Indiana, but when he's been a defensive coordinator, he's really stepped up. So all of those guys have the pedigree that I don't know one way or another. That's why I think it's more about the personnel, the players that are available. Mark, are USC's important players going to be 100%? Because I know guys like Lemon have been questionable and Eric Gentry. I know Bear Alexander opted out. I think I'm missing somebody. Lucas on the defensive line I think Lucas is going to be a factor if he's not, or a factor in favor of Penn State if he's not 100%.
Yeah. So Mekhi Lemon, he's back. He played last week against Minnesota.
Okay.
Bear Alexander, I'll be honest with you, kind of glad he's not here anymore. He held out in the spring, tried to get some more NIL, mission accomplished. Then he came in the fall thinking, well, I'm just the starter. Give me the starter reps.
Yeah.
You got to earn them still.
Yeah.
So you remove that. Eric Gentry is not playing in this game. That's a big loss for USC. He is a linebacker who is unique and does some really, really special things. As far as anything else, USC is going to be fine. Anthony Lucas, he got a little dinged up last week. I haven't heard that he's going to be out for this game. But yeah, as far as that goes, it's all hands on board right now for USC. They have the guys there. They don't have a lot of depth, so that's their biggest problem. You touched on one other thing. Lincoln Riley likes to call the plays. This has kind of been one of my narratives recently. For Lincoln Riley's next step of his development as a head coach, hire an offensive coordinator to be a play caller. There's just too
Delegate.
much of a head coach for you to be calling plays and trying to have your thinking about everything that's going on, thinking about everything else that's going on. Because number one, clock management, that might be his biggest bugaboo. He's not really good with it. And I think when you're constantly focused on calling plays and did that play work, did it not work, thinking ahead, you're just missing stuff on the minutia of the game. And I think that's the next step for Coach Riley. Now, I haven't given you my score prediction yet. I know Penn State is favored. I know they probably should win this game. They have the advantage in the trenches right now. That's where the game's going to be won or lost. I do think this game is going to come down to a turnover and special teams. As you mentioned, Penn State's got to travel all the way to the West Coast, enjoy the nice weather, play a 12:30 game on the West Coast, 3:30 on the East Coast. I don't think it's going to be a high-scoring game. I think it's going to be in that low, mid-scoring range. At first, I said USC 24, Penn State 20. I can see it going high 20s, somewhere in their field goal range. So I'll give it USC 27, Penn State 24. But again, I think it's going to take a lot. USC is going to have to definitely stop the run. They're going to have to force Penn State into some long third down conversions, make Drew show that he can use the guys on the outside. Because if he can't, like you said, they're playing on the road for the first time against a real team. We'll see if they're able to step up into that competition. What are your final thoughts on this?
I mean, I agree with you. It certainly will be the best team that Penn State has faced to this point. It's the most true road trip they've faced to this point. You don't know how to quantify that. At least in USC's case, they've been battle tested. LSU is because they're an SEC team, but LSU is just a good quality football team. No matter how you look at it, that's a quality win on a neutral site. And then again, if Michigan's at USC, if Minnesota's at USC, I don't know that the Trojans lose those games, and they were so close to begin with. But I also look at it and say, should USC really have been that close to a couple of teams that, again, they rely on really good defense, but Michigan at that point in time could do nothing offensively, especially in the passing game. Penn State doesn't have to deal with those same issues. They have a balanced attack. They'll throw 60 times if they need to. They'll run 60 times if they need to. And that's why I don't disagree with the idea that, hey, maybe USC can pull this off. I'm not saying that. I think it's a close ball game. Again, I only have it as a touchdown deficit, but it's tough for me to say that how does USC hold a Penn State group that has a dynamic offense compared to, Michigan puts up 27, Minnesota puts up 24. Why is Penn State in that category with two offenses that really can't do a whole lot?
As you said, they're on the road for the first time.
Okay.
And that, to me, makes the difference. And again, maybe it's a little bit of confirmation bias on my end. I've seen James Franklin before in big game situations. I know it's difficult for Penn State fans to accept, but it comes down to what is his big game win? And has he had one yet? He hasn't been successful against Ohio State. He hasn't been successful against Michigan. And when Clay Helton can hold you, hold the feather over you, that's what USC fans are hoping. Hey, maybe USC can get it done in the Coliseum. If not, it's bowl prep season. It's time to, look forward to the younger players and get them ready for the bowl season, because I'm afraid if USC loses this game, it could turn into another 2023. We're going to find out how good of a grip Lincoln Riley has on this team. But again, Penn State they're favored. They should win this game. They've got the advantage where it matters the most: offensive line, defensive line. We'll see if they do it on the road.
Yes, we will. Very excited for this game. This is the turning point of the season for both teams, not just USC, but Penn State as well.
Absolutely. All right, that's going to wrap it up for this episode. It's a crossover episode of Locked On USC, Locked On Nittany Lions. Zach, thank you so much for the invite. I really appreciated doing this. Hopefully we can do it again. We'll see what happens after the game. Yeah. So until then, everyone, you know what to do.